I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word.
I just want to say that I have never seen the Republican Party so unified as it is right now.
Former President Donald Trump says the Republican Party is unified, though 40% of South Carolinians might disagree with him. Trump won the Palmetto State's primary over the weekend, but Nikki Haley, the state's former governor, got 40% of the vote. Haley says she's staying in the race, but the billionaire Koch brothers say that they are pulling the plug on funding her campaign. Joining me now with the latest, The Hill's Brett Samuels. Brett, in Washington speak, Trump won, but he lost in South Carolina. Explain.
Right. So essentially what we're looking at is sort of a similar dynamic to what we saw in the New Hampshire primary, where former President Trump won rather easily. He collected the delegates from this primary. But there are some warning signs for the Trump campaign, especially looking forward to the general election. What we saw in South Carolina is that Nikki Haley continues to do better with more moderate voters in the Republican primary, with suburban voters, with independent voters. And these are the types of folks who Trump will need to win over come general election time. So even while Trump is on sort of a glide path to being the Republican nominee, there's some cleanup for him to do if he wants to have similar success come November.
Well, he was able to convince one person, the number 2 in the Senate, Senator John Thune. He got that endorsement recently, and Trump fired Ronna Romney McDaniel. Her team said she resigned, but between us, she was fired. And Lara Trump is now the head of the RNC. Of course, that's Trump's daughter-in-law, who's married to Eric Trump. She says that Republican voters are okay with paying for Trump's legal bills. But if Nikki Haley stays in the race, they can't that particular maneuver can't necessarily happen. Explain.
So essentially what happens is that Trump would be the presumptive nominee, quote unquote, once he has clinched the necessary delegates to win the nomination. And that number is 1,215. That's a number that he won't be able to obtain until, at the earliest, it looks like, about March 12th, right after Super Tuesday. His campaign says that Trump will have clinched those delegates no later than March 19th at his current trajectory. So until that happens, Trump cannot essentially merge with the RNC in his campaign. He can't do joint fundraising. He can't officially have his people essentially make these decisions about whether to pay his legal bills through the party. So that's sort of what we're waiting to see. Now, some Republicans in the RNC have told me that they would like to push this through, expedite this process, make Trump the presumptive nominee so they can turn their attention to the general election. But Nikki Haley is saying not so fast. That's not the way this works. We don't pick kings. We pick candidates. We let voters decide. So there is sort of this push and pull, this tension with the RNC. And as you said, Ronna McDaniel is out. Lara Trump and Michael Whatley, Trump's pick to replace Ronna McDaniel, are in. So this should all play out in the next few weeks. But Nikki Haley's camp is basically saying, not so fast on this.
Meanwhile, Biden and Trump are headed to the same place on Thursday, the border. So who's Biden's audience on immigration, specifically for President Biden?
Great question. This visit comes just ahead of the State of the Union, where President Biden is likely to message on the border, to call on Congress to pass border security measures. So I think that his audience is twofold. One, it's the American people, to show that he's taking this seriously. It's obviously sort of a political liability for him. And two, it's members of Congress who Biden is really trying to pressure to pass this bipartisan border security proposal out of the Senate that was declared dead on arrival in the House. So those are sort of the two key audiences he's looking at. But of course, this visit coincides with Trump heading to Texas himself, where he's going to certainly be on the attack on immigration.
All right, and then you've got, so this is right before, the Thursday visit is right before next week's State of the Union. It's also right after the Michigan primary, where Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib, did you see this? She's a far-left progressive from Michigan. She's telling members of her own party, Democrats, in the state of battleground Michigan, to vote uncommitted in Tuesday's Michigan primary. Tlaib is taking issue with Biden's leadership on the Israel-Hamas war, a war, mind you, that was launched after Hamas's October 7 terror attack against Israel. Tlaib's logic apparently is saying that the U.S. should not get involved in foreign affairs unless it's for the side that she wants, and that Hamas terrorists deserve a ceasefire even if they don't release all of the hostages that they took on October 7th. So progressives, like established now, not even just a rising star, but established star, Michigan's governor, Gretchen Whitmer, they're getting fed up with Tlaib. So is Tlaib really ready to be blamed by Democrats for re-electing Donald Trump?
This is one to watch, Kevin, I think. If you look at the Michigan primary on Tuesday, keep an eye on how many votes come out as uncommitted as opposed to for President Biden in the Democratic primary. I think that'll be sort of a telltale sign of how serious the opposition to Biden in Michigan over his handling of the Israel-Hamas conflict is. Obviously, Michigan's home to a lot of Arab Americans, a lot of Muslim voters who have not been shy, including Congresswoman Tlaib, as you mentioned, not been shy about voicing their discontent with how President Biden has handled that. Now, I think the Biden campaign, what they have signaled to me is basically if voters want to cast a protest vote in the primary, better than in November when it really counts. And the Biden campaign has told me that they're confident that these voters will come around come November when the choice is starkly between Biden and Trump. But certainly this is something to keep an eye on, really the intensity of discontent with Biden.
See, for this, though, I think it's more interesting for the purposes of this week, the dynamic between the state's governor and Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib. I mean, Governor Whitmer, who, by the way, is a co-chair of Biden's re-election campaign, has said over the weekend that a vote for uncommitted is a vote for Donald Trump. So what's the tension like right now, based on your reporting and the sources that you talked to, Brett, between Governor Whitmer, who many have said might even be a presidential candidate of her own one day, or should there be a shakeup on the ticket, would even run with President Biden? That's openly been being discussed in the pundit class. What's the relationship between Governor Whitmer and the tension right now with Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib?
Democrats have told me that really there's no love lost between Congresswoman Tlaib and the Biden campaign and Governor Whitmer, who are on the same page on this. The White House has been publicly open that they don't agree with Congresswoman Tlaib and some of her rhetoric on this issue. Congresswoman Tlaib did not join President Biden when he visited the Detroit area just last month. So clearly there's some daylight here. Folks have not been shy about saying that there's a disagreement here. And to your point, I think Tuesday, if we see a really high percentage of uncommitted votes, there's going to be some hand-wringing and maybe even some finger pointing, depending on how that shakes out.
Yeah, really fascinating. Governor Whitmer, also one of the lawmakers who's really been out front on the issue of IVF. Of course, 3 clinics in Alabama, IVF clinics, have stopped their treatment and IVF treatments as a result of the Alabama State Supreme Court ruling. How are Democrats messaging on the issue of IVF, and compare that to the response that we've seen from Republicans, who seemingly seem to be backing down and distancing themselves from the Alabama State Supreme Court? Even Trump made those remarks recently. But either way, a lot of Democrats are telling me that they feel like this is going to help them in the midterms and on down ballot races in particular in the upcoming election.
I've heard the same from Democrats, Kevin.
Yeah.
They believe that this is a direct consequence of the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade. Of course, former President Trump has taken credit for the Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade because he appointed those 3 conservative justices. So the White House, they've told me they're going on the attack on this. They're trying to hold Republicans accountable for this. Just this morning, the White House sent around a memo connecting Republicans, about 125 House Republicans who supported the Life at Conception Act, and basically telling Republicans, hey, square your support for this legislation with what you say about IVF, where you say it should be protected. So, the White House has told me basically, look, it's House Republicans saying one thing, but supporting another when it comes to policy. So, as you said, Republicans really backpedaling on this, really scrambling on this. And this is just another example of how the abortion issue, reproductive rights, is going to be front and center all the way through November.
All right, yes or no, before I let you go, is the government going to shut down on March 1st?
No, that is my one-word prediction. I think they've avoided it before. I think we'll see lawmakers, whether they punt it short term, we'll see them avoid it again.
I disagree with you. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say that there's a partial government shutdown on March 1st before the next deadline a couple of weeks later. Brett Samuels, excellent reporting as always. Thanks for coming on the Daily Debrief. Brett Samuels, everybody, the Hill's White House reporter. Thank you, Brett.
Thanks, Kevin.
The Supreme Court is set to hear two landmark cases this week centered on social media platforms and freedom of speech. Oral arguments begin on whether states like Texas and Florida have the right to tell tech companies what posts should be removed from their platforms. Republican lawmakers in Florida and Texas have pushed to restrict how sites like YouTube and Facebook take down posts, but the tech companies say that infringes on their freedom of speech. The bipartisan House Select Committee on China wants Elon Musk to open its SpaceX Starshield internet to U.S. troops in Taiwan. Committee Chairman Mike Gallagher learned of the issue while meeting with officials in Taiwan recently. Starshield is a satellite communication network designed specifically for the U.S. military. It got that big Pentagon contract recently. And Gallagher says that it's breaching its Pentagon contract by not providing access anywhere in the world to U.S. military and U.S. military personnel. That's it for today's Daily Debrief. My name is Kevin Cirilli. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel and come back right here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.